kind of slip up was against Magnus Carlsen a few days ago. He needs to make amends, and we're off. Dania, a Catalan.
A Catalan, and it took me a second to realize that Jan is actually black. I've pointed this out before. Jan likes to play the Catalan with the white pieces in rapid time controls. That's how he did so well in the RCC, the Rapid Chess Championship. Remember that? Jan, okay, he takes on c4, David. This is, of course, one of the myriad main lines in the Catalan, and a6. Now the big choice for white, and a4 is all the rage.
That's right. A4 stops black from expanding on the queen side. The World Championship match in 2021, we referenced it. It might feel like an eternity ago now. 3 years is a long, long time in the chess world. But the Catalan was one of the main battlegrounds there, Dania. And it kind of caused Magnus to turn away from 1d4 in the latter rounds, where he already had the lead. He didn't necessarily want to enter these theoretical waters, but solid stuff for black. We've seen a trade of pieces, but yeah, essentially white has a bit more space, but black has no weaknesses.
Now, I'm positive that this position has occurred dozens of times, but theory develops a little bit differently in lines like these, as opposed to, let's say, a mainline Najdorf, because as I like to put it, the price of a move is not that high. Right? Black has maybe 3 or 4 options that approximately maintain the same evaluation, but I'm sure that there is a most accurate way to play. And the question I always have is, does black want to play a5? Does black want to prevent white from playing a5? Is the a5 square important at all? Jan puts his queen on b8. Is he preparing b5 at some point?
I mean, it's a mystery to me. I thought I knew everything, or not everything, but I thought I knew enough about this opening to be able to give a good kind of breakdown of where the pieces should go. But I haven't seen a queen on b8 in this variation before, Dania. And like you said, price of a move isn't that high, so you can probably get away with such fancy kind of creativity here. But yeah, mystery. It's a mystery. It might look like genius in a few moves. Maybe he's going to play like a5, queen a7, queen a6. But for now,
you know what they say: the line between genius and something is very thin. I never know how that quote goes. But maybe this is Jan's point, that he's trying to keep Magnus guessing. Another idea: rook c8, and then dropping the bishop back. Maybe he'll go c7, c5. Black has a lot of potential pawn breaks on the queen side, and Magnus is taking a pretty long think here. So he's clearly identified this as a potential critical moment. Does that mean he's cooking up a committal decision along the lines of knight e5? Will he revert to a quote-unquote normal move? There's our answer, b4 by Magnus. Anything but normal in the context of the Catalan, going for the queenside minority attack.
Yeah, a thematic idea in queen's pawn openings in general, but like you said, black normally does prevent this. Black doesn't allow white to expand. And here we see another trade of pieces, so it's actually opposite color bishops. White has a light square bishop, which is somewhat blunted now with this pawn structure. Black has the dark square bishop, but minority attack. I think I've just seen too many classic games, Dania, with white breaking through with b5. I've been traumatized. Yeah. I hate this structure for black.
And then before you know it, black is an isolated weak pawn on c6, and then white is a knight on e5, and white is a rook on c1. And that reminds me of a game I watched between Karpov and Vlastimil Jansa in the 1970s. But I only half joke, because in the 60s and 70s, you had tons and tons of these successful minority attacks that kind of laid the groundwork for a lot of queen's pawn opening theory, as you're pointing out. But look at Jan just blitzing out, bulleting out his moves, and possibly to his detriment, because he might end up in one of those nasty positional binds. Is he underestimating the danger here, David, in your opinion?
I think possibly. Maybe against anyone else in the world, you could get away with this type of thing. But against Magnus, you give him a stable position with minimal risk where he can just massage the position and go for this one big weakness that now has been fixed on c6, as you predicted. I mean, this is a nightmare against Magnus specifically, but in general, it's just so passive. You're begging for a draw here with black, and that's if things go really well. You're highlighting the c6 where knight e5 is an autopilot move, queen b7 a threat. Just, I hate it, I've got to say, for Jan Nepomniachtchi. I'm really shocked the eval bar's roughly in the middle, because he needs to be so accurate already here just to hold the balance.
Yeah, I mean, this is clearly a nasty position. Now Jan slows down, but you get the sense that he went 100 miles an hour into this position so enthusiastically. Queen b8, quickly traded off the bishops, allowing b5. You had the sense that everything was under control, everything was planned. But in fact, I don't think anything was planned. And I think Jan is slowly starting to realize that he's got a long and arduous defensive task ahead of him, unless he can potentially engineer a quick c5 pawn break, which Magnus is not going to allow on Jan's terms. I mean, even if Black plays c5 and trades off the rooks, White still has a symbolic advantage. But I think that this is the lesser evil for Nepo.
Mm-hmm. He's going for that plan, rook to c8, not a pure passive defensive move there. He wants to play c5 and simplify the equation. I think he needed to do this. Otherwise, I was going to be even harsher on Black's position there. I was about to say, like, why don't I get these positions against these 2800s ever? But Magnus, yes, he's got a symbolic advantage. It might not be more. The top players, they're very good at their defensive work these days. And this could well be one of those types of positions where in World Championship matches, practice games, he's been playing these out with his seconds and he's been thinking, okay, it's sad, but I am going to make a draw no matter what, even if I have to suffer for a bit, Danya. And a draw with Black wouldn't be a bad result at all for Nepomniachtchi. So, critical moments. Magnus does need to apply some pressure in the next few moves.
Mm-hmm. And in a certain sense, the arc of this game reminds me a little bit of the first match game between Carlsen and Wesley yesterday, where Magnus also had a seemingly risk-free position. Now, there was a lot more meat on the bone, and eventually things turned around, and even Wesley was winning for a brief instant, then Magnus was winning again. That game went completely haywire in its final stages, but I don't see that happening here. Magnus still has 6 minutes on the clock. I think the question he's posing to himself is, first of all, do I want to stop c5 at all costs? And if the answer is yes, how do I do that? Because he can go bishop h3, he can play a move like queen b7, but those are one-move threats. Those don't really substantively prevent Black from pushing c5. The rook can just land on c7. The king has a nice Luft square on h7, so there's no problems with a back-rank mate, David. Can you put a rook on c5? Also not a serious solution. That's just putting a band-aid over the problem. Black's going to chase that rook out in an instant by landing a knight on e4.
Yeah, you know the move I would love to play, Danya? I would love to play knight d3 for White, but you're just one move behind. You can't legally play that move yet. If you could fix a knight there. Oh, even better. If you could get a knight to blockade that Black weakness on c6, then I think it's just long-term game over. But unfortunately, I don't really see a way, as you mentioned, to other than those band-aid solutions, I don't really see a way to kind of clamp down permanently right now for Magnus. And you referenced that game against Wesley. So yesterday, I was lurking. I was watching you guys, you and Tanya, the whole time. And that one really exploded. I'm hopeful that happens here. But if c5 happens, it's maybe less likely that this game really becomes wild.
Yeah, and I think Jan's time management seems to be justified. This has been his strategy throughout the entire CCT. He's played fast, even by Jan standards. In some of the play-in games that Tanya and I commentated, he would have 8 minutes. He had over 10 minutes at some point against Benjamin Bach in a game that he won entirely on opening preparation, and an opening that I haven't seen since like the 17th century. So Jan has been full of surprises, and the confidence with which he's played this opening and early middle game stage has been a pleasant surprise. But he's going to go c5. I think he's fully confident in his ability to hold a draw pretty comfortably here. Now he's 4 minutes up on the clock as well.
Yeah, and the viewers at home might be wondering why c5 is such a big deal. It will just result in a series of trades, and Black will still be left with one weakness, the pawn on d5. But look at Magnus on the camera. He looks a bit frustrated because one weakness will not be enough, especially if the rooks come off, especially due to the configuration of opposite color bishops. Long term, even if Black is left with an isolated queen's pawn, even if Black loses that isolated queen's pawn long term and more pieces come off the board, a draw, looks very likely at this top level. I think Magnus is struggling just as much as we were to find any permanent solutions.
He's pulling an Ali Reza. He's now down to 5 minutes on the clock. It was a shocking moment yesterday. Hopefully people who were watching when Ali Reza, in a must-win situation against MVL, burned literally all of his time before even entering the middle game. And Magnus is obviously not doing that. He's trying to find the best way to put any sort of pressure on Jan. Even if it doesn't result in victory, at least make the guy tired, make the guy sweat for it. 91 is on the board. A sip of tea and a sip of C. No, bad. C5, I think, will happen next. And I'm just going to stop digging myself into a hole because I am digging furiously.
I was waiting for those rhymes, those puns to come out, Danya. I knew it was a matter of time, just as it was a matter of time for Magnus to make his move. The one difference from his position to Alireza Firouzja's positions yesterday is the fact that this one is under control. It's stable. So even if Magnus goes down to 5 seconds, he'll be able to bail out with a draw. Worst comes to the worst. Firouzja yesterday, that was self-destructive, the way he was using the clock. But knight e1, a good move, and surely it's c5. It's time for that c to part and c5 to appear on the board.
Now, well, the Sicilian, better late than never. I'd prefer it on move 1, but move 22 is also sufficient. There are some other candidate moves that Jan might be considering. Queen a3 is an attempt to trigger an exchange of queens, and if the queens are off the board, then and Queen a3 is on the board, and I actually really like that move. You trade queens. Funnily enough, that bishop on a3 has a sort of halo surrounding it because white can't really move the rook up to c3. The bishop will just drop back to b4. I'll show this on the board. If Magnus trades on a3, he has a hard time getting this bishop off his back. If he plays rook c3, you walk right into bishop b4, you give black another tempo, and black can use this tempo to play c5. So this is not a serious winning attempt. Magnus, he says, not so fast. Hold your horses. Literally hold your horses. He brings his queen back to its initial square. And once again, the question for Jan, is now the time for c5, or does he keep procrastinating?
Yeah, procrastination is a sin. As I was told when I was young, you cannot do nothing. That's the recipe for disaster in chess. So I would say c5.
And not just in chess.
Not just in chess, you're right. Although chess players, we do have a tendency in life to procrastinate slightly. But okay, let's leave that for our therapy sessions, Danya. Right now, c5. I say he goes for it. I say, why not? I don't see anything else.
Okay, so let's try to look at it concretely. c5, what could Jan be afraid of? What if I play d takes c5, I assume you take back with the rook, and then I slide my rook over to a1, trying to create some awkwardness, maybe a timely check on a8, not sure where that leads. Maybe you go queen b1 and cover the escape square.
Ooh,
but okay.
Sneaky. Yeah, I like it. I think all of us would still prefer white, but just the thought of allowing a white knight to d3 and preventing this pawn break, I mean, the long-term suffering, you kind of want to solve your problems tactically. I think that's Jan Nepomniachtchi's style as well. I like this queen c3 move. So any check there on the back rank would have been met by a rook block. But Magnus is the one now hitting with tempo. He gains time against the black rook. The white knight will land on f4. If he wins that isolated queen's pawn with all pieces still on the board, Danya, then there's serious chances for Magnus. Jan needs pieces off. He needs to trade as soon as possible.
Exactly. He was trying to find a way to check off all the boxes, not just to win the d5 pawn, but as you're saying, to do it while keeping especially the queens on the board. I think he would be fine with just queens and bishops. As we like to say, opposite colored bishops, drawish tendencies, yes. Does it guarantee a draw? Absolutely not. And this is why we see Jan taking some extraordinary measures, confidently sacrificing the pawn, but doing so on his own terms or not. I think he simply blundered knight e2.
Wow, and you saw that shake of the head by Jan. Suddenly he leans forward again. He was relaxing maybe a bit too soon. Knight e2 keeps white's pawn structure nice and harmonious, all intact, all connected, and will win the pawn next move. And I don't think you can even force the queens off. That's the problem. He would love a queen exchange, even at the cost of this pawn. But Danya, white,
he is.
Oh, he does. Oh wait, sorry.
Now the knights remain on the board. But now the knights remain on the board.
Okay, that's the important point. I'll pretend that's what I meant.
That's what you meant, of course.
Exactly.
And we've never blundered pieces before. As commentators, we're flawless.
Exactly. We are human sometimes. So knight on d4, maybe leaping to c6, f5, some nice squares. There's only one real weakness in black's camp. That's this pawn on f7 on the light square. If white can somehow coordinate to attack it, rook on the 7th rank, a bishop maybe repositioning on a nice diagonal right now, but an empty diagonal. If it can target the f7 pawn, maybe chances. This is going to be a lot of suffering, Danya, for the next 50 moves for Jan.
Yeah, sounds like a great way to start my Monday. You have a pawn down endgame against the greatest endgame player of all time, which he can push forever. I think Jan should be able to hold this given his time advantage. He's got that nice 3-minute cushion, but we know how good Magnus is at converting positions like these, and he doesn't convert them in 5 moves. He usually doesn't convert them in 10. Converting a position like this is a matter of posing problems consistently over the course of a long period of time, forcing your opponent to fritter away his time advantage, and eventually capitalizing on a blunder. So this is going to take some incredible finesse from Magnus. I believe in Jan's defensive prowess, but remember, he blundered the move 92. He didn't sign up for this, so he's got to do that psychological work of coming to terms with the fact that he's going to be defending this for God knows how many moves.
Yeah, maybe 136 moves, just like that Game 6 of the World Championship match. I just want to mention their accuracy. This is how tough chess can be. You've kind of put up an accuracy of 97.7, as Jan has here, but you're pawn down and you're about to suffer for the rest of the game just to try and make a draw. Magnus here, slightly more accurate, but also the one having more fun as he gives a check and forces Black's king to make a decision. I really think he's going to be able to zone in on the f7 pawn at some point in the near future. Danya, self-pin. That's ugly.
Self-pin, what does that tell us? I think it tells us Jan was seriously worried about the prospect of an exchange on e7. And Magnus actually could have grabbed that bishop a move previously. I actually lost an endgame exactly like this. Rook bishop in 4 versus rook knight in 3 in a classical game against a Latin American GM, Axel Bachmann. I remember it clearly. And I felt when we got into that endgame that it was a dead draw, but you feel that way in a lot of these endgames, and then very quickly you realize that the defensive task is a lot more difficult than it appears at first sight. So Jan keeps the pieces as they are. He unpins the bishop, and he achieves kind of the perfect pawn setup here with this nice little pawn chain and a nicely protected set of minor pieces by the king. Very harmonious.
Yeah, really harmonious. And it might look counterintuitive for some of the viewers at home, Black putting pawns on light squares, the squares they can be attacked by White's bishop. But actually in a lot of pawn down endgames when it's just one side that you're focusing on, so here it's just pawns on the king side, by planting pawns on the squares that Jan has put them, you don't allow the opponent to step forward without making exchanges. So it's incredibly hard here for White to ever create a passed pawn. So White's going to have to win this tactically or kind of methodically by attacking the base of the pawn chain, but that's going to be a real uphill struggle. And it's fascinating, Daniel, like when I was making this chessable course with Magnus about grinding, we literally had one whole chapter pretty much on 4 versus 3 endgames, and he was like, okay, opposite color bishops, easy draw if it's just rooks. Same color bishops, and he broke down all the piece configurations, even this one. So he said it should be a draw with best play, shouldn't be too painful even. But yeah, we'll wait to see whether he can break down what Black hopes is a fortress right now.
And look at his clock. Magnus is down to 20 seconds. He's being very cavalier about his time. Now, we remind people just joining, there's a 2-second increment. So that's enough to keep your clock stable, but it might not be enough to capitalize on a tactical opportunity if it manifests itself suddenly. Jan is adopting a waiting strategy. Holding pattern, rook d7, rook c7, bishop d6, bishop f8. He's got a bunch of these waiting moves. So it's not a question of if, but a question of when Magnus tries to change the structure on the king side and push Jan's pieces back, thereby trying to create tactical opportunities. He starts with the e-pawn, David, and that's actually a really nasty move to face because you can imagine this pawn landing on e5. The knight is pushed away already. Then maybe you start sinking your teeth into the d5 square. But look at how accurately Jan is defending. This is fantastic defensive play.
Yeah, so calm, retreating with the Black Knight just to go and try and force this exchange of those horses there. And those knights are off the board, man, and the rooks as well.
It's that easy to draw Magnus in a pawn down endgame. Why didn't anybody tell me this sooner?
Wow, and Magnus doesn't even try. Look at the camera, Daniel. Magnus is so frustrated with himself, but ice cold defense there from Jan Nepomniachtchi, really impressive. Just 2 moves ago, we said he's going to suffer, but no, knights off the board, rooks off the board, opposite color bishops. Who cares if it's an extra pawn? We have the first result of the day.